It was built in the late 1100s along the Lieve River in Ghent, Belgium. It is also known as the Castle of the Counts. Throughout history, the castle has been a courthouse, a textile factory, and even the royal home of the counts. But in the late Middle Ages, it was at its worst. It was a place where people were tortured. We'll take a look at the castle and see the torture tools that were used.
Thumbscrews. It was common practice in medieval Europe to use thumbscrews as the initial method of interrogation for prisoners. This was the case the majority of the time. There is a good chance that you are familiar with this gadget of torture, which is essentially a vice that is designed to clamp down around the thumbs or fingers of a patient. During the process of tightening the screw, the fingers were gradually crushed between the two iron bars. The thumb screws in the Castle of the Counts were tightened to the point where they caused great pain, and then they were secured with a padlock when they were fastened in place. It is possible that prisoners may be placed in this state for days, with the only thing that could hear their screams being the cold stone walls. In the event that this did not succeed in coercing the individual to confess, the executioner, who was frequently also in charge of the interrogation process, would simply use a hammer to fracture their fingertips.
Spike collars. Taking torture to a whole new degree of heinousness, the spike collar was as if it were a more targeted version of an Iron Maiden. There was also a room in the Castle of the Counts that was specifically designed for the purpose of carrying out the surgery. Following that link will allow you to view the window in the shape of a crucifix that is located at the opposite end of the room. In the event that the interrogation took a turn for the worst, and it frequently did, that was the location where a priest would stand to administer the final rites. So, what exactly was it? To put it simply, it was a collar made of iron that had spikes that looked like needles and pointed inward. While the prisoner was standing in the middle of the room, it was wrapped around his neck and fastened around his neck. Following that, ropes were used to secure the collar to each of the four walls. If the prisoner moved even an inch in either direction, the spikes would pierce them through the throat and cause them to succumb to their injuries. In appearance, it appeared to be like this. The vast majority of victims did not survive past 3 hours. The limb cleaver. Although it is true that this was more frequently employed as a one-time punishment than as a device for chronic torture, the blade depicted in the image above was constructed for the sole goal of slicing off limbs, which is a morbidly particular objective. Moreover, this photograph was included in the display as well. A pile of severed hands and feet can be seen at the bottom of the painting. This may or may not have been an exaggerated depiction of the regularity with which the punishment was carried out, according to the illustration. A youngster who did not complete his schoolwork would have been subjected to this form of corporal punishment in medieval Ghent, which was comparable to spanking. Thieves and other small offenders were subjected to this punishment. One individual by the name of Jean-Guillaume Hanoff served as the final executioner in Ghent. It was in the year 1866 when he passed away, and his son gave his tools to the city. Among them was the cleaver that was mentioned earlier, in addition to his most valued hangman's noose. Branding. One of the more traditional ways of both identification and torture is the practice of branding. Branding has been used for millennia, and it is being used today in some livestock sectors. Branding can be applied to anything from an animal to a human slave. The nice individuals who worked at the Castle of the Counts were never the type to invent something new, but they certainly did not prevent any wheels from turning. The branding that took place at the castle served as a form of permanent sentence. When the judge made the decision that a prisoner would not be executed or released immediately, the sentence would typically fall into one of 3 distinct categories: severe, moderate, or light. In the context of travaux, a T brand denoted temporary subjugation of labor. For the term travaux perpétuels, a TP denoted forced labor that lasted a lifetime, and a TPF brand, which stands for travaux perpétuels faussaires, signified that the individual would be condemned to work for the rest of their lives for forgery, which was a rather serious offense to have its own category. Straitjacket contortion.
Without a doubt, this is not the same straitjacket that we are used with and enjoy in the present day. Ghent's straitjackets were actually made of leather, and they were intended to be as painful as they could possibly be. Not only did they serve the purpose of containing a prisoner, but they also served as a comprehensive torture device in and of itself. The arms of the jackets were equipped with straps that had been meticulously crafted to link with buckles located on various portions of the jacket. All of the buckles on the prisoner's jacket caused the prisoner's body to be deformed into shapes that were virtually impossible to recognize. Jackets that are longer could potentially be slung over the legs instead. In most cases, prisoners were only held in them for a short period of time, no more than a few days at most. But the manner in which the jacket compressed their limbs and spines frequently had long-lasting repercussions.
The mule. This weapon of torture, which is sometimes referred to as a Spanish donkey, is constructed in the same manner as a sawhorse used by carpenters, with the exception that the top of the horizontal board rises to a high peak. It was a common practice to force prisoners to ride on the back of a mule while large weights were strapped to their feet. You can see one of the actual weights on the left side of the picture that was just presented to you. According to all reports, the pain was so intense that it was beyond description. This was due to the fact that the individual's whole weight was brought to a point directly on their genitals, and the larger the weights were, the more heinous the crime that was committed. There are rumors that during the American Civil War, Union forces employed a gadget that was very similar to this one on prisoners who were held by the Confederacy. Many of the victims were left permanently disabled as a result of the incident.
Mask of infamy. When it comes to punishment, it is not always necessary to administer it in a solitary dungeon. When it comes to enforcing fast justice, the public can sometimes be just as thorough as individuals. In spite of the fact that it was extremely painful, the mask itself did not cause any pain. This was the concept behind masks of infamy. Instead, convicts were tied to a post in a public plaza and shackled into the grotesque iron masks. The post was located in a place where the citizens of the town could verbally abuse and ridicule the inmates. For the purpose of further humiliating the person who wore them, masks of infamy were intended to look as ridiculous as possible. And despite the fact that the punishment was not particularly severe, the iron could nonetheless attain temperatures that were sufficient for roasting on a day when it was exposed to the sun. There were likely hundreds of variations on the masks all across Europe, but in general it's believed that the masks with big, goofy ears, like the one above, were used for silly people, while masks with pig snouts were used for people who had committed a dirty crime, although there's no indication of what exactly constituted a dirty crime. Textile mills. Beginning in the Middle Ages and continuing until the 19th century, Ghent was a dominant force in the textile industry of Northern Europe. It held the position of the second largest city in Europe for approximately 500 years, immediately behind Paris. There are only about 250,000 people living there at the moment, and a significant portion of this is due to the fact that its textile empire came dangerously close to collapsing. In contrast, during its heyday, it had a relatively significant number of inmates, and the fact that it had so many prisoners meant that its textile mills had access to a great deal of free manual labor. There was a significant risk of injury in textile mills, particularly the water-powered mills that were in operation in Ghent during that time period. It wasn't always a death sentence to work in a mill, but it was common for individuals to be killed by the equipment or knocked unconscious by the leather straps that powered the wheels. Because, well, prisoners were disposable, it seemed evident that they would be the best option. The practice of stamping outbound fabric with a seal that indicated the destination and the name of the company that had created it was one of the practices that would be carried out during that time period.
The wheel. The wheel was a popular method of torture at the Castle of the Counts during the Middle Ages, and it was used extensively across Europe during that time period. In some instances, the prisoner would be fastened to the wheel and gently turned over a fire. In other instances, the prisoner would be allowed to walk around. Before the wheel took him back over the blazing flames, the prisoner had the opportunity to confess his sins during the brief moments of relief that occurred at the top of the turn. It was the preferred procedure in the castle to hang the prisoner over the wheel after it had been wrapped with a strip of iron spikes. This was done after the wheel had been wrapped with wire. The wheel was rotated in such a way that the spikes scraped across the prisoner's back. If the tormentors wanted to enhance the level of misery, they just had to lower the prisoner by a fraction of an inch so that the spikes dug deeper into his or her back.
Pressure belts. It wasn't until the 18th century that the concept of extending existing prison sentences was actually conceived. In the past, prisoners were held for a couple of days, possibly subjected to torture in order to coerce them into confessing, and then brought before a court for the purpose of being sentenced. During the lengthy hours leading up to their trials, one of the methods that guards utilized to keep convicts under control was the use of pressure belts. A wide iron belt that encircled the waist was connected to the iron collar that went around the neck. Chains extended from the collar to the wide iron belt that went around the waist. Welds were used to attach wrist shackles to the belt, and the belt itself could be tightened to the level that the guards deemed appropriate. When they were tightened, they frequently became so tight that they restricted the prisoner's ability to breathe. In addition, because the wrist shackles were coupled to the belt, tightening it caused the wrists to bend inward, which was excruciating. This resulted in the belt becoming a twisted hybrid of a straitjacket and an iron corset.